All right, you're all back, so I'm going to start up a minute early. I've got the schedule just so you know what's going on. Erase that. So, as mentioned, today is the lecture on Chapter 4. Tomorrow will be lab all period. Wednesday, you'll take the written test on Chapter 4, and the rest of the period will be lab. Thursday will be your hands-on for 3 and 4. We usually have them on a Friday, but since we don't meet this Friday, we're going to have it on Thursday. Next week, when you come in a week from today, I'll be lecturing on Chapter 5. Chapter 5 and 12 are the hardest two chapters in the book. All right? So after we get done with the lecture and we go over the review and the stuff at the end of the chapter, on Tuesday, I will give you some demos on how to use the DOM. So we will go over it. Some of you are already using the DOM on some of the stuff you're doing, and that's great. All right? And then the rest will be lab. Wednesday will be a lab, Thursday will be your written test, and Friday will be a lab. All right? Well, that's not that 11-17, I guess. And then the next week, that's Thanksgiving week, so we only have class Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. All right? So this week we only have 4 days. Next week we have 5. The following week, so 2 weeks from now, we will have only 3 days. So Monday, I'll lecture on Chapter 6, which is on forms. Then we will go through some examples on how to use JavaScript for form validation. All right? And then Wednesday will be a lab. There's no class Thursday. There's no class Friday because of the Thanksgiving break. All right? What that means is the next week is going to be skewed a little bit. So for the next week, we'll have lab on Monday, the written test for 6 on Tuesday. Wednesday will be your hands-on test. All right? What that's going to do is it's going to put us in position for at least the whole last week of classes. You will have to work on your portfolios. All right, getting everything in there. All right, at least that. And I'm shooting for more than that because this is going to put us here. We're going to be in good shape so that the next week, I'm not going to go down that far, but that's the week of what, the first, second, third, the 4th. So by the end of that weekend, the next week, we'll almost be ready to take our last hands-on test. All right? So if we do that on the 8th, you will have the next 2 weeks to work on your portfolio. Okay? But it'll be somewhere, it might not be 10 class periods, but it should be at least 7 or 8. So you should have plenty of time to work on that. And I don't want to hear, well, Jeff, if I get my portfolio done, does that mean I don't have to come the last 8 days? All right? Only if you want 8 unexcused absences on your record. And hopefully you know this. Hopefully your instructor isn't that big a bonehead that he didn't go over it with you. And some of you know this already. But if you miss 4 times, if you have 4 unexcused absences, then I have to fill out a form and have you sign it. And I have to say, hey, Matthew, you missed 4 times. Do you know that? And he'll be like, yeah. So he signs it. It's not a problem. Then if he misses again, he has to do the same thing, but with Mr. Corrigan. And he will go in and explain to you the importance of coming to class every day. All right? And boom. So that's the 5th one. Then you miss again. Then you've got to go over to the other building and walk over there yourself and talk to Mr. Sutton and have that form signed again by him. If it happens the 7th time, what the school does is they kick you out. Just one sec. And you can fight that. So let's say that you kicked it. I had to kick you out. And let's say Jesse disagrees with that. He's like, I don't think that's fair. Then he has to go and schedule a meeting of what's called the ADRB, the Academic Disciplinary Review Board, and he has to drive down to St. Louis, all right, and try to fight his case with them. Okay? Yes.
Do all the attendance stuff reset second semester?
It's all reset next semester, correct. Yeah, it doesn't roll over. No. I mean, I had a student last year, all right, you will have a spring break too. I don't know if it's in March or April, but you'll be off a week. And this student, okay, her family left, it was like the Tuesday or Wednesday before. So she had 3 days in a row she was missing. She told me she knew it. She said they already had, she had told me, they already had hotel and everything else. She was taking off. It didn't put her over, it didn't. But that put her at number 4 because she had missed one other time. All right? And she was and is still a very good student. So what the school tries to do is they say, hey, we meet 5 times a week. You can miss up to 6 times. You might have to get some forms signed, but nothing will happen to you. All right? Let's say Jesse did miss 7 times. But I knew that one of those times he got another ticket and the cop made him stay there for like 3 hours for whatever, or he had to drive him with him. So I knew technically I wasn't able to give him an excused absence, but I knew that was what it was. If that's the case, I can meet with the other instructors here and we can say, hey, we'll give him one more. We can do that. And sometimes we do. It depends on the student. But I mean, it's like if Colin just stops coming every day, and he hasn't come for 3 weeks, chances are if he comes back and he goes, hey, you know what, I was sick. I know I didn't let you know, but I forgot about it. He's probably not going to get back into the course. All right? That, believe it or not, has happened. People have left for close to a month and then come back and they're like, yeah, I know, I was getting my head straight. I've heard people come into Mr. Corrigan's office and say that to him. And he basically, in his own way, and he's not being mean, he goes, well, I'm glad you got your head straight. You're welcome to come back next semester. And that's usually what he says.
Can you back up to...
Yeah, again, that's this week. Leave it up there for a second. And this is being taped, too. So this will be on the tape. So again, your written test will be Wednesday. Your hands-on test will be Thursday. Any questions on that? I've got the hands-on test written for you already. All right? And also the stuff that we're going to cover now, please listen to this. You don't have to look, but please listen. The stuff we're going to cover for the rest of the period here, or the rest of this part of the chapter, the exceptions, I'm not putting that on your test. Not on this test. What does that mean? That means it's fair game for your next 2 tests. All right, but that stuff is a little more difficult, so I'm not putting it on this test. Next week, same kind of thing. But since we're starting, we're having the written test every 2 chapters, right? So next week there will be no written test. We meet all week, but you'll notice, wow, two full days of lab, 1 day where these take a half an hour, so you're going to have, and that will be probably the first hour or 2 with those demos. You'll have a boatload of time. But your next 2 tests after this one, the one that's on 5 and 6 and the one that's on 8 and 12, will be harder than the other 2 tests put together. Okay, because what you'll be doing in the test on 5 and 6 is you'll be writing stuff right to your webpage. You'll be using the DOM or the document object model to do that. All right, then when you get to the last test, you'll be doing the same thing, but you'll be using jQuery. All right, and many people struggle with jQuery. So I'm going to give you a lot of resources, and we're going to go through a boatload of examples. All right. Again, then, when we get to here, that's Thanksgiving week. I don't know any other way to do this because I want to give you plenty of time. Again, your portfolio is 10% of your grade. And I'm doing this because Evan's doing it this way. You must use Bootstrap, not Mobirise, for your portfolio. Come next semester, if you go, I really hate Bootstrap, I love Mobirise, then you can change it. All right? And then again, the end of the month. So what I'm saying is by the end of this month, we're done with chapters 1 through 6. Okay? We go through, your last day is the 21st. So that's about 3 weeks or so. We'll have 3 weeks to get through 8, 12, and give you a good amount of time or as much as we can. So again, I'm not being held to this, but if I go copy this, and I move down to here, I got that up down here, but I did. And I put in this. So if we start where we get into what? That'll be like the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th. And that's all 12, of course. So once we get into that point, my hope is, since we've already gone over the lecture for 8, we very well might do it like on Monday here, have like the written test for Chapter 8. And then we're going to have the lecture here for Chapter 12. And then jQuery demos and lab. And lab. And probably lab there. So probably that when you come back the 11th, that'll be the last day of your test. So you'll have the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st. That will give you 8 class periods. So if you go, I don't know a lick about Bootstrap, you have time to learn between now and then. I don't care when you do it. If you use Bootstrap version 3, which is the older version, I would suggest you use Bootstrap 4. All right? Especially if you want other people to look at it, because once you put it out there on the system, I would suggest you do that because you'll have the latest and greatest out there for anybody who looks at your portfolio. All right? All right, we'll be going through this. I'm going to save that file, so we'll be going through it again. All right, that gets us in our book. Not there, but there. Okay, I'll find it. There it is. All right, so that gets us to handling exceptions and errors on page 263. Here is another question right from your test. Oh, come on, get out of there. Right there. Writing code that anticipates and handles potential problems is often called bulletproofing. All right, so one of those questions on the test will be something along the lines of, writing code that anticipates and handles potential problems is also known as, and one of the selections will be bulletproofing. All right. Now, sometimes too, it's called that. This isn't on the test, but just so you hear it. Another word for bulletproofing is defensive coding. All right, just so you know that it's writing code that tries to anticipate possible problems. Guess what? You've been doing that for your tests that you've been doing for the BMI stuff. You anticipated the user putting in nothing, or putting in non-numeric, or putting in an out-of-range value on the low side, or putting an out-of-range value on the high side for either height or weight. So you've already written 8 different ways, methods, functions of bulletproofing. So you've been doing it already, whether you realize it or not. Another way that you can do this is by using what's called exception handling. And this may sound like a dumb statement, wouldn't be the first time, but if you look up on your screen there at the top, exception handling handles exceptions. Again, when you get an exception, it's something that is not meant to happen. It's an exception to the norm. JavaScript, as mentioned here, this is the middle or bottom part of 263 right there. JavaScript includes 4 statements that you can use with exception handling. The good news is you use these same statements in Java, JavaScript, and C#. So everything that you'll be doing from here on out, you will use these statements. All right? The first one is try. So what you end up doing is you end up writing what's called a try block. So you will write something that looks like this, try. And then in curly braces, this is code, I'm going to put a comment here, code that could fail. All right, whatever that code is, it doesn't matter. That's what you do, is you write it in a try block. Then you have one or more of what are called catch blocks. So this will handle an error. Whatever it is you decide to do. All right? And this last thing that's in there is finally. This is optional. I'm going to put an asterisk there, meaning it's optional. And here, you do typically what's called housekeeping type of stuff. So, when you do this, you end up writing blocks of code that look like this. You'll have a try block, which means put some code in here that could conceivably fail. You'll have one or more catch blocks that will say, hey, if this happens, do this. If this happens, I might have another catch block down there that does something else. And then finally, people look at it and go, housekeeping? What the hell does that mean? If I'm working with a database, I would close the database in a finally section. If I'm working with a file, I would close the file there. All right? This is a really important thing. Right there, a finally, always runs. Always, the finally statement runs. If I put 5 lines of code in here, and I do line 1, then line 2, then line 3, then line 4, then line 5, and I have no errors, so if I do everything in my try and I have no errors, I skip this. Does that make sense? It's kind of like an if statement. It isn't, but it kind of is like one in the way that it works. If I try doing part 1, or line 1, and I get an error, it jumps down and it tries to find a catch that matches it. If it goes all the way through and it can't find a catch, the program aborts. So if you don't handle possible error conditions, the program handles it in the most bad way possible by terminating your program. All right. Now, believe it or not, I just gave you the majority of what's in here. So it says you enclose code that may fail or may contain an exception in a try block. So inside of the try, you've got one or more statements. All right? And here they say when there's an exception, the exception is what's called thrown. The program will throw an exception. So here's an example. Now, all they put in here is an if statement. Is that the way that you want to handle your code? Let me erase this. It's too hard to read otherwise. So this is how we've handled it in the past. We put it in a while loop or an if loop or an if within a while or whatever. All right? After you throw an error, you use a catch statement to handle or catch the error. So there is an example. You'll have to go through the examples that are in the book, and even at that point, you'll probably say, okay, I sort of get it. That's why I don't want to test you on this now. I want us to have examples using it as much as possible. I want you to start to develop a comfort level with this. All right? So there's the finally that's on page 265. Then what you do on pages 266, 267, 268, and 269, those 4 pages, is that you go through an exercise with this tube of farm equipment where you add exception handling. So there's the try. Now notice what we're doing right here, because we haven't talked about this one. So let's look at this on the bottom of the page. If this basically in English is what this is saying is, if the number of acres that we put in was 0 or less, we're doing what's called throw an exception. If there's a problem in your code that JavaScript realizes, JavaScript throws an exception. But you can throw, singular, you can throw an exception yourself anytime you need to or want to do so. And then your program must catch the exception that you throw. Does that make sense? All right. So again, you'll run through that example, and it's fairly inclusive. All right, you do everything in there. Between that and what's at the end of the chapter, my hope is that it'll make enough sense to all of you. You're like, okay, I at least sort of understand what's going on. But again, I will guarantee you that in one form or another, that will come back on one of your next tests. All right. Then turning up to page 270, we're almost done. The last page is 277. Implementing custom error handling. It says the primary purpose of exception handling is to provide a graceful way to handle errors. That may not sound like a big thing, this line right here, but it is important because I already told you this, but I'm saying it again. If you don't handle errors in your program, the program handles them. And if the program doesn't understand what it is you're trying to do, I've given this example before, and sometimes people laugh, but it's the truth, whether that's good or bad. It's like fighting with my wife. It doesn't matter how right I am, I always lose. Seriously, it's the way it is. That's the way it is when you fight with the software. It doesn't matter how right you think you are. If the software doesn't understand what you're trying to do, and you don't provide it a way to handle it when it doesn't understand it, it will handle it itself. And again, usually in the harshest way possible. So, JavaScript has something, as mentioned here on the bottom of 270 and the top of 271. It says JavaScript includes an error event that executes whenever an error occurs. Well, what does that mean? That means that if you want to code this, again, this is another way that you can handle errors. If you look right here, if you look at that line of code, this is why I don't want to put this on your test, because things like add event listener, that's what we're going to go over in Chapter 5 when we talk about the DOM. And since you haven't really been exposed to that yet, I don't think that it's fair to test you on stuff you haven't really been exposed to yet. Yes?
Is there going to be the .enter HTML in there?
No. On your next test, no. On your test on chapters 5 and 6, definitely. All right. You can also come in, as mentioned, starting on 271, and write your own custom error functions. Maybe the user has done something that actually, in your opinion, is so bad that the program should abort. You can have that happen, but you might want to give them an error first that says, think about it. It's like here, I think it works this way here. Tell me if I'm wrong. That if you try to log in and you want to read your mail at Rankin, and you try to log into Inside Rankin, which is probably, I think, the way you do it, and you try it more than 3 times, and you put the wrong password in every time, it locks you out. That's the system trying to gracefully be, rather than coming back and saying, hey, nitwit, or whatever, all right, it's letting you know. And then you have to get unlocked or wait a certain amount of time or whatever. So you can do that. And they give you an example of it. Again, there's some DOM code in here. That's why I'm not going over it right now. On pages 272, 273, 274, and 275, they give you some additional debugging techniques. And one thing in here says check your elements. All right. Well, sometimes it's something as simple as you might have a problem, but the problem might be in your HTML. All right. Well, what does that mean? That means when we get back, not on this test that you're going to be doing on Thursday, but your tests on 5 and 6 and on 8 and 12, you're going to have to validate your HTML again. You're going to have to validate your CSS again. All right, and that's what they're talking about here. All right. Then on 273, the author talks about analyzing your logic. Okay, does everybody get this? Please, everybody, look on the screen. Right now, it does not matter. It does not matter if this is true or false. That line always executes. Does everybody get that? It's because we don't have curly braces. If we wanted these 2 lines to only occur when that was true, we'd have to put these 2 lines, a beginning curly either here or here, and an ending curly down there. Does that make sense? And people do it all the time. I do it. Everybody does it. All right? And part of it, the reason is because most programming languages, if there's just a single line of text, so pretend that line's not there, you don't need the curlies. But that's why I always put them in no matter what. So that's analyzing logic on 273 and going on to 274. On 274, they talk about tracing statements with the console command line, and it goes on to 275. Well, guess what? You already know how to do that. I already showed you the console statement. You can also use document.write that they show up here. All right? But document.write writes right to your page. Some people don't like that. They like their error stuff to be written someplace separate. That's where the console is a good place. Finally, on the bottom of 275, using the debugger statement, which is on the bottom of 275 to the top of 276. Again, JavaScript includes a statement debugger that can make debugging easier in some situations. When you add the statement debugger to your code and run it in a browser with the debug tools open, the browser stops executing the program when it reaches the debugger statement. All right? And you say, why don't they have an example of that in there? Because it's typically not used. You typically use one of the other methods. The last two things in this chapter, three I guess, but the next one. See this line of code right here? Use strict. All right? When you put in that line in your JavaScript, it should go at the top of your JavaScript, right at the top of the file. What that means is, hey, rather than allowing anything to happen, be a little more strict with your rules, and if you find something that looks like it could be wrong, flag it. All right? And many people that I know that are JavaScript programmers, always, their company even requires them to put that line in there. All right, to help with debugging. So as it says, starting with version 5.1, ECMA, the European Computer Manufacturers Association, included a new feature called strict mode. In strict mode, some features are removed from the language, while other features require more stringent syntax. For instance, if you create a variable without var, you'll get an error message. All right. I think I've mentioned this to you before, but in case I have not, JavaScript does not have a validator, but it has several different types of what are called linters that you can use. You know how when you got lint on your clothes, how you take a brush to it? The idea with linting code is the system will go through it and look and give you suggestions. Hey, you could have done this or you should have done this. One of those tools is JSLint. All right. So when you lint, as they mentioned on the bottom of the page, it says on the very bottom of the page there, it says linting your code with JSLint catches many of the same errors as executed in strict mode. However, while strict mode helps you strengthen your code by generating error messages in a browser, JSLint actually generates a report at the bottom of your program. If you don't know what I mean, just Google JSLint and run it on one of your files. The problem with JSLint is it was written by Douglas Crockford, and he's an unbelievably intelligent guy, but he's one of the people who helped create JavaScript. And as far as he's concerned, if you don't write JavaScript the way he does, JSLint will find errors. Like he believes that when you write this, I believe this is his syntax, I write it like if x greater than 3, y equals 7, something like that. He believes it should be written like this. So he will flag this twice for those kinds of errors. So some of the stuff that he does, for lack of better words, as the saying goes, take it with a grain of salt. All right? And the last thing that the author mentions here, sometimes if your thing is just so hosed, Does everybody know that button right here, this thing? It looks like an arrow. That reloads the page. Sometimes that's the best thing to do. It's like, why does this keep getting stuck? Just reload the page and see if it fixes it. That's it for the chapter. So let's quickly go over the review questions that are on pages 280 and 281. All right. What kind of error occurs when the interpreter fails to recognize code? What is number one? What? That's not D. B. Number two, what kind of errors in the design of a program prevent it from running? All right, what was that answer, Jesse? All right. No, it is C. You are correct. All right. Number three, when it encounters a problem while the program is executing, what type is that?
D.
That is D. Number five, which of these statements that are shown here causes an error?
B.
Why B?
Have the points. Semicolon.
Well, you got the right one, but you got the wrong reason.
The quotation.
There's no beginning double quote before the word available points. All right. I think there's a question, there might be one or two on the test that are like that asks which one is incorrect. Number five, which of the following statements writes the value of the selection variable to the console? Well, first of all, everybody gets it, right? That B is out. Does that make sense? Because there's no document.console. So that would be out. Okay, boom. Next, there's a console.alert. That doesn't exist either. So the good news is it's got to be A or D. All right? Which one is it and why? Remember, this is the value of a variable, not the word selection, but the value of the variable selection. So is it A or D and why? D, you are correct. Why?
Because that's calling the actual value of that variable.
Because it'll put the variable in there. With A, it'll put the string selection in there, not the value of a variable. Number six, which of the following four statements is logically correct? What about number one? Yes or no, and why? I'd say number one is not valid. Why isn't it valid?
Because count will never be less.
That's right, because that'll put you in an infinite loop situation. Number two, just taking a quick look at it, that doesn't look bad to me. Number three, that looks pretty good because you're going backwards. And so number four. So the answer to that would be A, because they ask which one is logically incorrect. All right. Number seven. Which of the following modes temporarily suspends or pauses program execution? Which of those modes? Come on, somebody can at least guess. That's what I'd say. C, break mode. Number eight, which command executes all the statements in the next function in browser debugging tools? Believe that's A, step out. Could be B, but I don't think it is. All right. Number nine. After you throw an error, you use what kind of statement to handle the error? C. You're both right. C, catch. Number 10. In what some features of JavaScript are removed while others give you more stringent requirement? B, strict mode. It's what we ended the chapter with. Number 12. What statement can you add? I guess it is 12. I skipped 11. Number 11. Which of the following pieces of information is passed as an argument from a throw statement to a catch statement? I believe it is that. It's the error message that you want to have. It's not the error number. There may not be a number if it's your own error. It's not the line number. That may or may not give any help, and it's not necessarily a URL. Number 12. Which statement can you add to your code to effectively serve the same role as a breakpoint? The answer is D. It's the debugger. All right. Number 13. The watch list in the browser debugging tools lets you monitor the value of a or an, and it's an expression, I believe. C. It's a variable, but I think they want expression there. Number 14, the blank is an ordered list. We all know that, right? 14 is D, the call stack. I showed you an example of that. Number 15, which of the following executes regardless of whether or not the try block throws an exception? That's correct. Finally, always executes. Number 16, what is the advantage of tracing the errors using the window.alert method? What is the advantage of the console.log? I already gave you that. With the window alert, it's right on screen. With the console.log, it's in another window. And that's either an advantage or a disadvantage depending on your point of view. Number 17, you debug code. A lot of times you comment out every line and you bring it back in a line at a time. Number 18, 2 different ways a text editor can help you prevent errors and debugging in code. One way, just so you know, one way is depending on the error thing, it'll change the color. All right. And or it'll put the little squigglies underneath, meaning you did something wrong. All right. There's other editors, like the one we'll use next semester, that has what's called IntelliSense. So it'll attempt to end something for you, like a code completion type of thing. Number 19, when and why should you use exception handling? You use exception handling so that you can take control over your program. All right. Number 20, again, what is strict mode? You implement it by putting double quote, use strict, double quote, semicolon, I guess, at the top of your program. And what it does is it allows some features that would normally slip through to not slip through, and it's more stringent as far as how it checks things. So you'll notice in here also your hands-on projects. That show, you are shown in here. I guess it's still working with the tuba things. So there's 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. All right, at least one of those will work with it and the rest won't, I guess. As you will probably realize, as we go on in here, these hands-on exercises will get more and more difficult. All right? And I'll tell you what we'll do is let's just call it a period here, and then tomorrow, first thing, I'll go over the review questions with you. We'll do that for the first 15 to 20 minutes or so. All right? And then Wednesday again will be your written test on Chapter 4. Thursday will be the hands-on test on 3 and 4. Questions? So again, you have not as much time as I guess I told you, but you do have 2 hours to start working on this stuff today.